Hey everyone! Welcome to Working with Designers, a podcast where design meets business. I'm Kristin Silva, and alongside co-host Jake Cooper, we dive into the real stuff behind branding, client work, creative strategy, and running a design business. We keep it honest, a little nerdy, and always practical. So whether you're a designer or just working with one, there's something here for you. Let's get into this week's episode.
Ease into it like normal.
So how do we want to frame today? I know it's kind of our dump, catch up.
Yeah. A check-in as opposed to a dump.
Check-in.
Though maybe they're the same. Maybe. We don't know. We'll have to see how it goes. Yeah, I figured today would be a good time to just see how we're both doing with the business, talk about some things that are popping up that are worth sharing. Maybe we can even check in on how things were going the last time we did a checkup, because I think that might be kind of cool. Yeah, so just a kind of casual. I'm hoping this is interesting for people to see kind of the inner workings of design brains and design businesses, to see what we're thinking about and voice some things that don't often get voiced.
Yeah, and I have, if we do go a little short or we feel like we've kind of summarized things pretty quickly, I do have a couple subjects that we can maybe incorporate if it's off the cuff, if it feels right. So
yeah, for sure.
So now, can you remind me? I'm trying to think of January's recap. What did we talk about?
The thing that I'm remembering is you were dealing with, you were sharing your experience of working with a client that was kind of putting you through a test kind of framework, and kind of how that made you feel. And I'm curious how that kind of situation shaked out.
Yeah.
So maybe you can talk about that.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So, I never won any work from that. I did have ongoing conversation with them afterward, and the ultimate result of kind of they sent out an exercise to not only me, but a couple other local design firms here in the state of Rhode Island. And they realized through the approach that they have already, it was too late in the process of their campaign to even want to do something new, and it went a little over their head. So I did have an opportunity to talk to them about strategy and how, what probably could have been better for next time. So it did open a conversation with them. They're very nice. I don't think it was malicious or anything.
Yeah.
I think it was all well intended. So I did get a good conversation out of it. It didn't cost me much of anything. And so that was the result of that. So,
yeah.
But it was the first time, and I think we talked about this, it was the first time that I'm sure I've done tests before, but I can't remember the last time I had to do a test. So it did make me really think okay, next time someone actually asks me to do that, how would I frame that differently? And I think that was the most important thing to think about. And so, yeah.
Do you think you are more, less, or the same amount of willingness to go through a design test process in the future?
I think I would have pushed more conversation and trying to get them to just have more dialogue with me, as opposed to being yeah, sure. And then thinking about it and being really begrudgingly an angry designer in the background. So I think when you ask critical questions, I think you can my assumption is that you can kind of back your way out of a test when they start realizing that it's probably not achieving what they need to achieve in that moment. So
because the test itself was more design execution rather than strategy. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Technically, yeah.
Because I was going to say, you can't really test strategy,
No.
you either get their insights or you don't. There's not really like a middle ground where
Yeah, and there are things that I think, especially when like they fall within my niche, which we'll talk about. I know we kind of went over niching last time, but so like a lot of the strategy is almost like, I mean, there was a level of intuitiveness on my end that and value in my experience and my track record of working specifically within this niche that I think you know, in a small exercise is probably not showing the value, but there is strategy in it,
mm,
from a lighter standpoint. So,
yeah.
yeah. And now this reminds me that this is the time I brought that up last time because you had someone that needed marketing as opposed to branding. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
what happened of that?
So this is actually the thing I wanted to talk about this week.
Oh, okay.
Uh, we mutually walked away from the project, this client.
Is this the one
This is the,
that
yeah, this
this
is the
is the
one I've
one
been
that didn't
talking
work
about.
out?
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about it today because I feel like designers don't necessarily talk about like when to walk away from a project, maybe being fired from a project, or deciding that like you're just not a good fit together, and what you can bring out of that experience. Because like as much as I didn't want to lose the business, I understood why it was right to walk away, and there are some good like lessons to learn. So to give a bit of setup, I was talking last time about a client that needed more. It was less about getting new design work for them because they needed a rebrand, and more that they just need to get their name out there with materials and just getting more presence awareness in the market. And we had agreed to do like a monthly design subscription model. There wasn't copy ready to go, so we had to spend time developing just the copy of it. And there was a miscommunication about whether this design was intended to improve upon what was there or to simply just replicate existing brand identity and go from there. And I hesitate to say that those are all like red flags, but they are things that I could have ironed out in the communication process, just to get on the same page. I'm realizing that when I was working with this client, there was a lot of like assumptions being made that probably could have been more explicit. Um, so yeah, so we got halfway through the project. She was unhappy, and the further we got into the project, the more it seemed like she just needed these things being made rather than having them being considered design. And as we were getting halfway through, she got kind of cold feet, was like, I think I want to back out of this. I sent her a review of all the work that was done because we had gone from ground zero. And I shared with her like the most recent round of the designs that were being worked on. And her response was like, no, this isn't the right direction. So when I got that feedback, I'm like, rather than try and shoehorn my process, no harm, no foul, we'll go our separate ways and be amicable about it.
And how do you, if you don't mind me asking, when you said you did like a 1 month subscription,
Yeah.
how do you price that for, I mean, you don't price your time, correct?
Not
Or,
really.
okay.
I'm trying to do an estimate about it
Mm-hmm.
because the typical requests that I could fit into that 1 month subscription are like generating marketing materials, generating kind of basic products and ideas. And as I'm going through it, I'm realizing, I don't know if I have this model really fleshed out. I don't know if I have enough, you know, guardrails on the whole thing for either of us. So it's making me rethink like how feasible is a subscription model, especially in isolation of like just a 1 month commitment without expectation of, month over month review.
So, something that you had brought up that I have another question about is when you said we're going to try to do as much as we can in a month. How do you frame that? Because that could mean a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
Like as much in a month could be like how frequently are you talking to this person? Or do you mind me asking these things?
Yeah.
I
No,
have
I
not,
think,
I want to quickly say, I have not mastered retainer model at
yeah.
all.
And I
So,
think, and I kind of want to poke holes in it a bit as
yeah,
like as a case study.
yeah.
Cause I'm not the expert in it. It was my first time trying this model and I'm realizing more of the implications of it.
Now, a subscription model is like a retainer model. Is that
Yeah.
how you're, because I know you're using
Yeah.
subscription.
Yeah, it's really a retainer model. I'm using the word subscription just because I feel like people are more familiar with
Mm.
subscribing to somebody for a month, and it's less like I'm keeping you on reserve and more like I'm giving you access.
It's interesting that we've already dived into this, and I want to unpack it more, but I will say, so I just jumped into a networking group. It's called the Founders Dinner Cohort, and we had a guest mentor who just sat down and talked about his experience. This guy, Peter Carlson, and he runs a tech consultancy, and he was talking about the retainer model and how
Mm,
so he does fixed the first project is fixed, and he always sells an approach as opposed to a statement of work. So
mm.
I want to pick his brain far more, but
So what
um
does that mean? An approach rather than a statement of work.
I mean, I'm still trying to break this down, but I will
Okay.
say that
Okay.
um you're selling like your strategy, right? Like the
Mhm.
way that you so it's more conversation and less like it's more conversation.
Less like
I want to
tangible assets, more strategy kind of
yeah.
thing. Okay.
And I want to I'm hesitating because I've also been diving into research about this, so I don't want to mix up his advice with like everyone else that I've been reading.
Yeah.
um, but in any case, he was talking about retainers. He was like, "Well, I usually do a fixed price, and then I pull them into a retainer afterward." And I was like, "Well, how do you do that?" Because so in my situation, what's tough is I have teams that don't necessarily need me that frequently.
Mhm.
Like they'll have a couple little things, and so it might be a sales problem on my end where it's like I definitely could find ways to 100% add value to them if I was there on a monthly situation. They tend to kind of go rogue, do a lot of DIY on their own, and that's probably my lack of kind of educating them, saying, "Hey, you could pay a fraction of a salaried employee, have access to not only me but my whole network, every month,
Yeah.
But so I asked him, I was like, how do you figure that out? And he says, by day, do a day rate. Say your minimum is
Hmm.
a day, and so say your day rate is 1,000, and they can cancel at any time. And if they have something bigger come up and you know that in the future, you can just directly put it against the retainer. So maybe they have like a floating amount, say come next February, of your retainer amount plus the extra that they need. So then you're always getting paid before the work. And so I don't know. Makes it
So
sound simple, but this is what he's been doing.
if they don't use that time, do you retain that payment? No, it just gets floated over.
No, if they don't use it, you still get it because you're they're buying your time. There's only a certain amount of time you
Yeah.
can sell people that retainer model because they own you for a portion of time.
Right.
And so you can't you can't price that twice.
So this really making me think about this quote from The Business of Expertise, and I've been rereading this book, so I'm like finding all these new quotes to pull out of it and new things. So people get frustrated that I'm like just quoting this one book over and over. It's because I'm actually rereading it right now. So a lot of my information is going to be sourced from that one space. But he has this idea called 2 rooms, 1 exit. And the idea is that your business should be broken up into 2 rooms, strategy and execution. But there's only 1 entrance and 1 exit. And you only get in through the strategy door and out the execution door. You don't always have to do the execution side, but you have to enter in through the strategy side. And the idea is that, individually, there are strategic disadvantages to just being on the execution side or even just on the strategy side. Strategy, the competition and application of that becomes very undifferentiated if you're purely strategy, and execution becomes like a race to the bottom where it's who can do the work the fastest, the cheapest, because it's just like taking the pieces and executing. Really the exciting work happens in the marriage of the two. And his recommendation is to, weed out all of the work that's, if you're in an expertise-based business, like we are, a strategy business, to try and weed out as much of the people that are just looking for execution and focus more on the strategy side until you can start to expand how much of your role is strategic versus execution. And as you get to that execution phase, you can kind of, pull in whatever assets, people, resources you need. It's still under your name, under your domain. Really, the execution side of it is less dependent on your specific input, really more your guidance overall. You don't have to be the one, manipulating the files. You don't have to be the one illustrating the illustrations. You can really just oversee and art direct the project. So I like that analogy of it being 2 rooms.
Well, something that I need to share that I don't think I've really disclosed is that, I originally was in a traditional agency model with Studio Quiche, and I moved to Collective because I had to.
Yeah.
Because what the growing projects that I have, at the caliber that I'm working at, the people that I'm working at, what they demand, I have to work with senior staff across the board. I have to work with top level copywriters, top level illustrators, top level animators, developers across the board. And for someone who is, outside of my contractor model, a company of one, I have to harness all of the strategy. I have a huge lift on my own, and, I have other strategists I can kind of bring in that are working in very fractional ways. But to be able to grow, I'm probably going to outgrow the Collective model and go back into agency model once I can afford it. But I can't bring these people in full time. I couldn't afford it. I could not afford it right now. That's why I'm in the Collective model.
Yeah.
But
and
I do agree. What?
I was going to say, and maybe the industry is shifting away from having full-time, employees at that execution level.
Well, a huge thing that people don't talk about is it's not that okay, say I had a huge nest egg of money underneath me, right? And I wanted to say, okay, I want to do an agency model. Okay, creatives don't play well in the sandbox. Have we talked about that? No one wants to work full time for another creative. They want to do their own thing.
Yeah.
And so there's also this respect of being like, if I want to work with those people that are the no soup for yous, I call them.
I like that. The no soup for yous.
And I love them. I love no soup for yous. Deeply. I'm like, yes, you are my person,
Yeah.
You have a strong sense of conviction against something. It might be wacky. I don't know. I'll bring it to the debate table with you and we'll see where it goes. But those are the people I want to work with because they're so passionate and they're so pointed in their, there's so many things that you can learn from a skill set in design. And if you don't have a clear sense of opinion or thought or way of working, that's a very difficult road forward as a creative. You could get lost in the sauce at any point. So I think I don't know. I'll stop. I'm going into a
No,
rant,
I think that makes perfect sense. Like if you
yeah,
want to work with really talented people, they're gonna be specialized. They're gonna
yeah,
be turning certain things down to the point
yeah,
where, retaining people as an employer in a creative industry means, sacrificing some of that specialization. And depending on the caliber of projects that you're working on, that might be a disadvantage. You
yeah.
might really want to have that flexibility to swap in professionals,
I will
experts.
say, I do agree with your analogy. What was it? Sorry, what's the book
Two
again?
Business of Expertise by David C. Clarke.
Business of Expertise. I do like that you said say it again, sorry. It's
Two rooms, one
rooms,
exit.
2 rooms, one exit. Something that I feel is so, I believe in that concept because
Or I'm
I,
sorry, two rooms, one entrance, I think is maybe it.
one
Two
exit, one
rooms, one
entrance.
door. Yeah.
I mean, no one wants to exit from strategy without fun deliverables, let's be honest.
Yeah,
So,
no, of course.
probably one entrance, one exit. But I truly agree, 100% agree with that. And also, I would say, I think a red flag with
Mhm.
if you are working with a design team that's outsourcing strategy, huge red flag.
Yeah,
That is their main differentiation. And if they're white
yeah,
labeling that, that's so unethical. I'm sorry. I have hard,
yeah.
you can like, I think it's totally okay to um send out um production,
Hmm.
um you still have to be very interwoven with your contractors, even in the execution of things. So it's hard to
Yeah,
to completely send out, like,
yeah.
I don't know. Anyway,
No, yeah, that's a weird line to cross where it's like, well, what are you hiring this company for? Because they have the network where they can find strategists, bring them in, and then they can execute, or because they have the strategy in house and you could execute this a number of different ways. Yeah. I think that's kind of the model that's not, clients aren't always informed about how these structures work and what it means to work with a creative company. And even I'm still figuring out stuff.
yeah, and I should
Having
say
worked in
there's,
only like two models, three models.
well, I think there's also like very specific things in strategy that you can also send out, right? So like
Yeah.
you could have someone do one-on-one interviews or certain quantitative and qualitative research practices, sure. But you need to be the one analyzing, collect, the curation of things, the
Right.
editing of things is you or me or whoever's that
Yeah.
lead. Um, so
Yeah,
yeah.
you're a director. That's where I feel like the title makes the most semantic sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So So going back to your experience,
Yeah.
what would you do differently? You felt it. I remember the first conversation you said I kind of had the ick that she didn't need, let me argue me here if I'm wrong. You had the ick that she wasn't interested in probably your strongest services.
Yeah, that's fair to say.
So
And another, I mean, this is kind of a red flag, and I should have caught it. She hired me without looking at my portfolio, which I chalked up to being like, oh, we just had a really good conversation, and she likes what I have to say. And I'm like, maybe they need to see the portfolio first, just to, or not
in
even
your
that.
defense,
Yeah.
in your defense, what an odd thing to ask someone, have you seen my portfolio? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? You would think that we should have a whole thing on
I
why you should evaluate a portfolio.
I've had friends of mine that have hired designers not wanting to inconvenience me, which is its own thing. I would have done it. But they've hired other people or have shared experiences where they hired them without looking at their portfolio first, get their designs back. They're unhappy. Shocker, you didn't look at what you were buying, you know?
I think, unfortunately, there is a section of the world. I don't know how to say this. Maybe that's starting it off not PC here. Hold on. How am I trying to say it? There's a group of people, however you want to select it, that
Like, which way are we going to go?
I know. Where's Kristin gonna go with this? So, that just like doesn't have an understanding that like we're not a one size fits all kind of an artist.
Yeah.
Like, you know, we've had this conversation before, you
Well,
know.
well, yeah, and I mean, we've all almost argued both sides of it, where like being a strategist or being a strategic designer means being more flexible to other people's styles, but then
Okay, yes.
at the same time, can't do everything.
Okay, yes. However,
Yeah,
however, it hasn't happened in a while, but I've had this conversation with you before where people will, oh, so can you like
can you
I haven't
paint?
seen your paintings. Like, what?
Yeah,
I've never used oil paintings in my life. I wish I could.
yeah,
But there's a huge misunderstanding that we can all just kind of whip up anything at any given moment,
yeah.
which like very superpower
You know,
like
good
skill.
good luck, babe, if you can. That's my that's my
So yeah, okay. So
what I do differently. I have some more concrete things and some more strategic, abstracty things. I would definitely always use a design brief. That's kind of my big takeaway is I feel like I could have avoided some of this miscommunication just really getting super clear on what the statement of work is, what the expectations are, maybe even being more explicit about strategy versus execution. And like I'm not beating myself up for not knowing this going in, but I think that's maybe a good thing to take away from this is really get clear as you can on exactly how you fit, what your role is, what the real end goal is. And not just in terms of their 6 months down the line, which I think is an important thing to include, but also how that engagement, whether it's 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, whatever, is going to go. I think it's worth the upfront effort of really digging into how things are going to pace out.
in our
Yeah.
situation, we do a lot of the messaging that's baked into the brief. So we highlight and identify a lot of messaging in our briefs and do a lot of research, and that's baked into the brief as well. I would argue to even call it a project roadmap,
Yeah.
you know? Um,
Yeah, I think that ties everything together. That's a good
yeah.
idea.
And you can go deeper, right? So there are moments when we'll say, hey, this is like bare bones messaging, audience profiles, whatever, personas, whatever you want to do, key targets, the things that, I'll always say, like, what's our top 3 action steps that we want to do within this project? And like, what are the deliverables we're thinking of? What are the metrics we're, looking at?
Yeah.
Are there any goals in the next year that we should have on our radar? So I have these kind of broken out in our brief. And then what I'll say is, there are moments when I say, we have yet to start a true messaging, like that, which is more strategy, right?
Right.
The messaging can be expanded upon. We're just showing that this is what you're about. It
Yeah.
might not be worded exactly how we want to sell you externally, but internally you understand that this is who you are and we understand this is who you are. As long as that's checked off, we're in a good place to start and get on the
Yeah.
ground running. So,
And it makes me think that, a lot of people say, this should be an RFP. You should have all this up front. You should, do this work pro bono. This is a lot of work, just understanding how to take your project from one one idea to an actual execution. It's worth like putting money and effort into getting this like prognosis or this diagnosis step, put together. Blair ends in the Win Without Pitching manifesto talks about the discovery phase, the diagnosis phase should be a paid experience because there's value in doing it.
and they, oh my God, yeah, I've been in it.
Mine's sitting on
Actually,
the table over
speaking of
there.
which, have you picked this one up? This is a new book that he
No.
came out with in December.
Ooh.
4 conversations. I have yet to, it's
I,
unread yet, but
I'm literally going to buy that after this
I will,
episode.
yeah, I will let you know. But a new model for selling expertise, the 4 essential conversations you need. And it's got actually, it's kind of different. It's got these like great little, I can't even see if it, not doing it right.
Like
Not
divider
doing it
pages.
justice. Oh, just like cool little charts and like,
I love that.
got like
Yeah.
design love.
I like that.
So yeah, so that's on the list. But actually later on, I'll come back to it because I've been listening to the Two Bobs podcast and I wanted to
Yeah.
actually, yeah. And anyway, we'll get back
We'll
to
get
that
there.
in a sec. Back to Blair, but going back to the January recap, I
Yeah.
realized you had brought up actually 2 parts of when you were bringing up the marketing engagement that you spoke on. And one aspect was when someone dives in to, I'm paraphrasing here, let me know if I get this correct. They're diving into deliverables without a structure in place, but they're expecting certain results without having assets to work with, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember, but I had that situation happen to me with one of my bigger clients. And I was having a hard time because we were working blindfold and backwards, basically. Like we're already in web design and they're like, oh, we don't really, this isn't doing anything for us. And I was like, okay. And they willingly, so to recap on that, and then I'll go back to Blair RFPs and that.
Yes.
The result of that situation, I had to meditate. I pulled all of my hands out. Like it was just me working on this. It wasn't working with my design, like the designer that's on this and the UX UI, just me. I had to sit in solitude and they said, they were like, we trust you. Whatever you think's best, it just needs to be better. We understand we don't have the assets, but if you can just pretty much Hail Mary this into something good. And I did it, and they're very impressed, and it worked out. Am I happy that that's what happened? No.
Yeah.
Because it was so time consuming. I think the thing that people don't realize, when people hire us, it's like I want to be careful because I'm not trying to make a villain out of anyone. When you skip ahead thinking, oh, you don't need something, and then you come back to it, the amount of time and energy and effort to get the design team to work backwards, the cost for that is so far more, like the reason why a good designer is going to tell you their process because it gets you to the finish line the fastest. They're never going to propose the opposite. That doesn't make sense for anyone. No one wants the slow road. The
Yeah.
designer, no one. So when you go backwards, you're paying more for nonsense. So anyway,
Because really, as much as the work you created was great and they're happy about it, because it's unstrategic in a way, because they haven't articulated what actually works for them, when they encounter a problem with the design or with some marketing goal, they're not going to know what to do. So they're going to have to
uh-huh.
go through this process again.
Yes, 100%. So, I didn't go full throttle in the way that it would like, if I truly did what could have been done to, to your point, it would have tanked me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I have to come up on time. I'll never take a loss. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
For a project. However, what I did was I entered the space to then educate them that, because afterward, what happened, they're very happy. Everything's going well with them. We've discussed having new scopes of work. But they have marketing material coming up and they're like, oh, well, we're so excited. We have more assets. And I was like, well, don't get too excited. You know what I mean? I'm like, I
You're
mean, we
like,
can try, but
we still have to, we're
realistically,
still missing that same
we're still
strategy
missing
phase,
that
discovery
strategy
phase.
phase. Yeah, that ties everything together, right? And
Yeah.
makes everything easy. And so what happened was they got really enamored with another company in their space and they loved the execution of their website. And they were like, we really love this. We want to do something like this. And so what happened was I ended up having a great educational opportunity with the client and said, look, I can tell you based on the evaluation, one, you can Google this. You can find the case study from the brand team that did it. They created a whole brand environment for them. And the website was just an afterthought. The website wasn't even in the case study. So my assumption, they had an ironclad strategy asset deck ready to go. Whoever jumped in and did the website, whether for a fraction of the cost or however did the marketing material, they had the whole suite ready to go. So they didn't know this information about this. And so I was able to sit down, educate them, show them this. And then I actually picked up Win Without Pitching and took a couple pages out of that book to explain to them one of the rules Blair had described that's really important is to never allow when you have multiple tiers of approval rounds to never allow the client to present your work on your behalf.
Yeah.
And so we had a debrief call actually this week, and I just kind of discussed that in really polite, eloquent ways of how that's really important to get us to where we need to be pretty quickly, to allow me to be in control always of that presentation space.
Yeah.
So happy client, they're very excited. We're signing on to another round. It's not the way I wanted it to go, but you know what? We're all learning and I'm becoming a better educator for it. So anyway, that was a long-winded response.
No, but it's a good tie-in to how things went with that project.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what else?
Yeah. So in terms of like breaking down this loss of a client into action steps, I would definitely develop a better design brief for every kind of project rather than, letting some assumptions go. I'm thinking that's a step that could be really valuable down the line. The other thing I was thinking about, and I've done before, but I didn't do it on this project, maybe for lack of time or whatever. I've seen other people do it. They create like a how I work document that they send when they onboard a new client. That's just like, hey, I really value, sending emails at the end of the day. My cadence is like, I'll only send emails when there's information or when there's an update so that you're not, just being peppered with emails that are not useful. You can reach me here. We can text this way. We can chat this other way. Just a real like, this is my style of working rather than just like leaving it all to email. Because I think in hindsight, that was one of the issues with working with this client. They really wanted like immediate answers. They wanted a check in every day. They wanted to like see progress happen every single day. And that's fine that they want that, but that's not the way that I work. Mine is more of a snowball. You know, you build some things and it builds up, and I'd rather be as asynchronous as possible rather than being in constant communication. So if people are out there thinking about, how do you onboard somebody, I think a little like how I like to work guide can be a valuable thing to send someone.
I'd like to add that I wonder if actually I'm going to defend you and actually not agree with being too kind or lenient on the constant, immediate.
Yeah. I
Good
mean,
things
I
take
don't do
time.
that.
Well, good things take time.
Yeah.
And that just might be, she, this person may just not be at the place in business to advance to your expertise, your level of expertise.
Yeah, that's entirely possible. But even for, you know, I want to respect that everybody has a different way that they like to work. Some people really value like a stand-up meeting where everybody's in front of each other just getting 5 minutes to talk. Some people really hate being interrupted and want to just do their work and check in when they're done. And I lean more towards the like let's eliminate as many meetings as possible. Let's only get the people that are necessary. Let's be as let's create as few dependencies as possible for help work-life balance for everybody's kind of sake. That's my philosophy on work.
I heard a really funny joke before that was like, if there's no food in the meeting, it could have been an email.
Yeah, accurate, completely accurate. You know, well,
No, I like that you have a very flexible approach. And yeah, it's interesting.
and
It's interesting.
I think people really value it at times too, far more than the people that don't. But that's my own opinion there. I will
Yeah.
say, being kind of a freelancer in another person's agency, it is tricky when you get these like stand-up meetings with 8 people on it, and you're getting billed for all 8 people. Like, it's maybe even a financial decision to be like, let's eliminate as many meetings as possible. But just something to think about.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think something again going back because Blairens has been very much
Yeah.
the book on the table right now, and just really and the Two Bobs podcast too. Um, I have been trying to actually instead of sending lumps or bigger sums of work, and it's tough, right? Because as a strategist, in the design space it's very difficult to sometimes trickle certain kinds of work to clients
Mm-hmm.
because you have to solve it's like a jigsaw puzzle showing them one piece when you don't know how it's fitting into everything else. That's also kind of difficult to present and try to move forward through, right?
Mm-hmm.
um but I am trying to, the second, like maybe we're in the middle of strategy and we're doing these things. If I need to jump on the call, just ask a couple, like do a mini strategy session without even being like, I need to put you in a strategy session,
Right,
just
right.
call the client, get whatever that little thing you
Yeah.
needed from them, that little insight to move forward and keep that momentum going. I think the best client relationship management, like trait is just making sure that they're not reaching out to you wondering where you're at. As long
Yeah.
as you're you know what I mean? I think like it's really important to be always the one pushing for a flow of communication. I do like weekly stand-ups. I think that weekly stand-ups are great in certain situations. I don't think they're necessary all the time. I really like focus groups when you have just a ton of decision makers. Um,
Yeah.
but I don't think you need a ton of them, you know?
Right. I think finding that balance is important. And it's funny, I feel like the recommendation in the design space is always like more iterations, more feedback quicker. And I generally agree with that. But also there is this like I want to have enough to show that they understand what we're working on. Like you don't want to give them every minute change or the client's going to lose sight of like the big picture.
It's scope creep comes in, right?
Yeah. And at a certain point it becomes designed by committee if you're getting their feedback on every single thing.
100%. Yeah, I think it's more of just if there's anything holding up a phase.
Yeah.
I think instead of us trying to think that we can pull and find the resource like from some research, I think just calling the client is the best thing to do.
Yeah. I'm working
Yeah.
I'm working with a long-term client now on some presentation work, and they wanted to like create a new look for their presentations, like really up their game. And this project started like in October, so it'll be almost 6 months soon. Um, and it's the rounds of feedback one after another have just been slowly changing the direction back and forth between what's actually like making a design great and what's just getting bogged down in the minutia that like it would have been better if we just did one big sweep in a go rather than drag this out over so long.
Many decision makers, you think?
Maybe that, maybe
Too
not.
much time?
Too much time. I think that's what it is. It's just like they're losing sight of what the actual project was, and it's just diving into we need to make changes on this page and then schedule a meeting to do that, and then not everybody can make it. It's just they're a good client, so I deal with it, but it's the same thing of like I'm realizing this could have gone much smoother if we did it a different way.
Something that I realize too is that like as much as we have frustrations and we air them out here or wherever,
Yeah.
I think the biggest frustration is realizing that it's on us to dictate this. And when it goes wrong, it's usually us, you know,
Yeah.
that needs to kind of take a reality check and be like, okay, what did I do wrong here? And like going back to Blair Enns, they like he talks about in the pitching manifesto that power struggle
Yeah.
and how you're always going to be a tug of war, you know, a bit in formulating that kind of control over a project. And like, of course your client's going to, if your system isn't ironclad, your client is forced to be in that position to take control. So like, you know, it's that kind of like reality check that maybe our processes aren't really as tight as we thought they were, or when things become like in flux, how do we address that?
Yeah.
You know? So yeah.
My only last little takeaway from this experience, which I think can segue into the Two Bobs podcast and what you're reading about from Blair Enns, is it's just really making me think about how I niche how I position myself as a business, and is this the kind of work that I want to take on? And is this the right fit for the skills that I have? So it's really getting me to that level of thinking about my niche, thinking about what's the right application of my skills relative to the market and, the amount of time that I can commit to it.
Yeah. I like that. That's where it's heading. That's great.
Yeah.
So,
So tell me more about your week and what you've been reading and listening to, because I blabbed for an hour. So
no,
your turn.
I feel like I'm always the blabber. I don't know. And then when I like watch these kind of, okay, wait, recap.
Recap.
Woo! Podcast.
Yes.
Honestly, I have to say, I love that it's such a simple thing. Us doing this podcast has helped me stay on top of being more aware, like having a conscious awareness of where I'm at in my design growth, my business, and overall. Do you agree?
Yeah,
like
100%.
I think that if I didn't have, it's like accountability, right? Like we're talking and all of these things
are we accountability buddies?
We're accountability buddies. But I mean, I would like to think that we have these ideas kind of ruminating, but maybe not at the speed that they're actually happening now at. So I just wanted to say, I was thinking about this morning and I was like, I need to say, hey, pat on the back to both of us. I think this has been fun,
Yeah. No, you don't get a chance to really talk at that meta level when you're in your own business, when you're just doing the work. So it's nice to like have someone else poke holes in some ideas and talk about what they're going through.
It's also we don't talk about this enough, but being a business owner is such an isolating space.
Yeah.
And so I think, not to speak for yourself or people that are listening, that are in this space as well, but I think it might be cathartic to just have that space where you're talking or listening or, we're talking to each other and learning from each other, but also listening into just other people going through that. You can't talk to your contractors or your employees about this. You can't really talk to your family members too, especially if they haven't been in business themselves.
Yeah.
So, which might be different. You have self-employment in your family, right?
I do. Yeah. I guess I do now. Yeah.
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 But yeah, so
learn nothing from them though.
No, but it's a nice space. But what was the first question you were asking me? How was my week?
How's your week? What have you mentioned that you're reading more Blair Ends. You're checking into the Two Bobs podcast.
Yeah. I've had a lovely pocket of time to designate on working on the business, and that has been a while since I've had that. So yeah, I have a very precious amount of time that then is going to be taken from me soon enough. So yeah, so I've been actually doing our whole sequence. I've been revisiting everything for Studio Quiche.
Nice.
And niching is in it, all of our messaging, reevaluating everything, and also just kind of really trying to answer that critical question of like 2025, and that being like, what do people need from us, and what are those access points, right? So like we've talked about it before, like education and workshops or consulting or retainers, and then also like what is like the custom project boundaries around that? Like what is that? Is that like how small does that get? How, if small at all. So I've been thinking a lot about that, and I've been listening to Two Bobs. For anyone that doesn't know Two Bobs, it's a podcast with Blair Enns, who we've been talking about, and then David Baker, right?
Yeah. Or is it David C. Clark? Am I crazy?
Oh, I thought it was David Baker. Is it David C. Clark? David something.
Ironically, not Bob's.
No. Well, isn't that a reference? Isn't that a reference from a movie?
Oh, to be
Office
honest.
Space or something?
Oh, is it an okay? Oh, okay, yeah, it is an Office
Okay.
Space reference. Yeah, David
Hmm.
C. Oh, David C. Baker in Blair Ends. I've been calling him
Yeah.
David C. Clark. My bad. My
All
bad,
good.
David. You know I love you. I'm reading your books.
So, what's lovely about this podcast is it's different than ours in the sense that it's only like 35-minute episodes. They're short. They're short and they're really just they're from what I've only listened to a couple of them, but they're open-ended. So, they kind of bring up a subject and they go, "Oh, I'm thinking about this and I don't know." And they are very what I love about it is both Blair and David have they're not set in stone in any of their theories and thoughts. They kind of keep it as an evolving door and they come back to a lot of things that they've written about in the past, bring them up and kind of twist the conversation and actually create like an argument against what they originally thought too. So it's a really
Hmm.
interesting. I love that they appreciate and are very honest about that kind of or bring shed awareness to that because I think that like we all kind of have that, in the form of evolution, just like, it's okay to kind of fact check yourself and also like
Yeah.
look back and opinions are serving a point in time, but then can change,
Yeah.
based on your environment. So,
In any relationship, the willingness to be wrong, to
yeah.
admit that you were wrong, is huge.
Yeah, yeah. And so I love that sort of they're very casual and humble. Um, but they have a there was a very interesting episode that they had put out I want to say a couple weeks ago. Well, actually, I think it was like end of last year, so December of last year. It was called the barbell of pricing risk. So 85 to 90% of your investments are ultra safe, low risk.
Hmm.
10 to 15% is the other side of the barbell. That's high risk, high risk, high reward.
Okay.
In the middle, you're going to avoid. So for David, he believes that you should never price even time. So going back to
Yeah,
our thoughts about even
like that
doing like a
retainer
day
model.
rate.
Yeah.
Yeah, like he's thinking never time and encourages agencies to focus on outcomes and client results always.
Hmm.
And there are a couple concerns that they start bringing up. But before that, Blair kind of says, okay, so if you look at this, safe and low risk means pricing time or deliverables
Yes.
as a safe. That's a
Yeah.
safe zone. It's predictable, but it's limited, right?
Right.
You can't scale that, right?
Hmm.
On the high end, you have your performance-based pay or equity deals, which are either very profitable or not at all. So this
Yeah.
is more thinking of like if you have people, you're saying, hey, we're going to do this completely value-based for a profit. I'm bringing in all my resources. I have to still pay them. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
So, like, what is that? Are you taking that profit margin as that risk? Which is not, I don't think you and I even fall in that level of being able to do
Right.
that. But
I was gonna say
that's,
this is where like David's uh teachings can go a little over my head because I'm not as big of a business where, taking risks like that are A, as common or available, and B, as, practical at my scale. Like if you're a multi-million dollar business, you really can quantify a lot of those numbers to say, like, can we risk taking only a percentage based profit on this project, and or do we not do it? Like, I think that's also it's very dependent on the type of work that you do, and maybe that's what he's getting at too. Um, but I think it's only applicable to certain types of businesses. Um, but yeah, what do you think about it? I'm curious. You wrote it down as a
well, so where this left me, so the conversation they had is left open ended for thoughts, obviously.
Mhm.
And I think when I think value-based pricing with the kind of work we do, it's kind of tough, right?
Yeah.
I have case studies that definitely are like, yeah, I mean, that could have been a great, could
Yeah.
have been a great moment. When do you activate that? How do you activate that? How does a scope look like that? You know,
Yeah.
how do you even like when people say, "Oh yeah, you need to do a based agreement." When do you stop working? What is the end goal of that value? Are you constantly working for them until some like what, you know what I mean?
Okay.
How do
Yeah.
you quantify? Do you think of this too, or do you have the knowledge to be able to kind of answer that?
Here's my interpretation of value-based pricing, and feel free to poke holes into it. Um, I I started getting really interested in this pricing uh, philosophy from Christo in the future. His YouTube channel, podcast, great person. And he often referenced Blair and David. He's actually how I got introduced to their thinking on this subject. My interpretation of value based pricing is the work that you're doing has a result that has a ticket to it. It's got a number to it. If you increase conversions through your website for a multi-million dollar business, you're giving them a specific quantifiable increase in business in dollars. And you, as a business owner, can price your service as a percentage of that increase in profit. And that's why you don't charge a mom and pop shop the same rate you would charge a multi-million dollar business, because the outcome and effect of that is different for each of them. You can still put in the same knowledge, expertise, but no matter how much knowledge and expertise you have, if you're applying it to a smaller company, you're going to get a smaller result. Therefore, they won't have as much value in a, you know, hypothetical $100,000 service that a multi-million dollar company would. Same way that Pablo Picasso, draws on a napkin and says it's going to cost you $1,000 for this napkin. Just because he did it in 5 minutes doesn't mean it didn't take all the expertise and knowledge of his entire life to be able to execute that quickly.
So my question is,
Yeah.
okay, so I'll give you a real
Right.
example.
And that was
So
the
I,
philosophy take versus the practical, which I think you're going to dive into.
do you want to dive into it?
No, no,
Do
no,
you
no.
want, or
I didn't want
this
to
is
cut you
okay?
off, but I did.
Okay. No, no, no,
No,
it's
no, go
okay.
ahead.
Um, I wondered if I cut you off, I was like, oh, maybe he's going to go right into it. So, I was going to say, I had a situation happen, I don't know, like 5 years ago, 4 years ago, I don't know. And I, yeah, redid just did a refresh, around a, packaging company, uh, cracker company, consumer packaged goods. And, so through that, they went from kind of not really great sales, excellent product. This stuff is delicious. And so I was like, oh, this is going to be good. And like, that's not my job. So the fact that you have that good, perfect.
Right.
So they ended up increasing sales after our strategy and brand refresh, by 575% in the first month,
Wow.
and then a continued 50 to 75% for 6 months. They were then became nationwide within 3 years, and they ended up going on and doing another evolution to the brand with another team. Whatever, this happens all the time. I think they had new management as well, so like it kind of like everyone that comes in wants to do a new stamp on things. So it's like not anything you can kind of take in. But through that moment, right, of like the 575% and then the increase, and then they're in Erewhon's, they're in like Albertsons. It's more of a West company, but they're nationwide. They're in Instacart now, in like
nice.
subscription boxes, all kinds of things. how would you take that as a value based, like, how do you break down that
Right.
for, like, there's numbers there, right?
Yeah.
But then how does that break down to profitability for you? And then also, when does it stop, right? After they
Yeah.
do another rebrand? Or like,
Yeah. It's a
does
good
that get
question.
wiggly?
So here's how I think Christo would do it.
Yeah.
This is what I've learned from Christo, and maybe I'm wrong, but this is the takeaway I got from him. He would say, it's all a matter of negotiation on the one side. There is the literal, like, you can count how much profit you have made them, but you're only going to, be able to sell as well as you can negotiate. So you kind of need to understand all the numbers and then figure out how it relates to the person. So I would say if you can, I think he would recommend if you can figure it out such that your example, your design work would increase sales by, for this year, $1 million. Let's just make it super hypothetical. He would say, I think a reasonable price is 10% of that. If you give me $100,000, I think we'll be able to return you $1 million by the end of the year. That sounds kind of reasonable. You spend 100,000, you get $1 million. That seems like a fair risk assessment. And then you have to, vet the credibility of the person that's doing this work. So it's a level of risk. Are you willing to take a 10% risk to get that $1 million reward? If you want to lower that price, you then go into what we were talking about with layer ends. Can you give me a percentage of the returns? If you want me to lower my price, I'm taking on more risk as the provider. So I want in return more reward. So give me a percentage on the back end. So maybe we'll do this for free, but you give us 2% of all profits for however long makes sense to you. Maybe in perpetuity, maybe whatever. Um, or you, and I think that's going to work if you can prove that you can get the work done and that you're competent. I think that's a good sales technique to really look at the numbers and say what it's working. Let alone, can you do that work for $100,000? Now that you know that that's what you're going to bill, do you feel confident that you can source the right creators, the right partners to get all the work that they need done to do it? And I think that's where you come in as a business person to say, how can I get creative? And is this the right type of work I want to do? Is this the right client I could serve? Blah, 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 blah. So when as a personal example, the clients that I try to work with can afford to invest my prices and see, I assume, like a 10x result based on what I'm charging. And I think that's fair because I can do that much work as one person and have reasonable accommodations, like take care of the bills and still deliver a lot of value to my clients. I think that's where the numbers got to break down. So when we see like people on Fiverr doing logos for $50, it's like, are you really getting your risk is crazy. Are you getting a logo that actually solves your problem, is, moving you towards making a value, an ROI on what you're spending? And is it worth it? I don't know. I'm kind of rambling, but that's
That's interesting. So you ask more questions, kind of understand more of the sales
yeah,
aspect and understand, like, well, because there's other aspects too where it's like,
right.
okay, well, like, how much will that cost them? Like overhead, obviously, and be aware
Yeah,
of, like, so it might not be 10% of the overall sale, but 10% of something else, or a different percent of something else. But that's
right.
interesting.
And it also works with another factor in that is people have assumptions on what the work should cost, whether that's, accurate or not. Some people are like, I would never pay $2,000 for a website, let alone 20.
Yeah. I think it's interesting too because it's like, what, how do you attribute a timeline to a value like that? And how do you attribute when enough is enough, that you've kind of committed your bit
Right.
for that kind of contract?
I feel like
Um,
you set a price that you can reasonably deliver your multiple in terms of
yeah.
ROI.
Hmm.
And as you get more and more data, you can up that number
Hmm.
in either direction because you can guarantee results, or you see that the results you do get are bigger than the multiple you're using. I think that's how you use value-based pricing as a formula. Yeah.
I think it's a lovely motivator.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lovely motivator for sure. But it is a lot of effort, and sometimes you have to have a huge amount of trust on these people because you're only one part of the equation, and if you're working with someone that's not the person you want selling whatever they're selling,
Yeah.
it's not a good deal.
Yeah, and that's the element of risk. And sometimes it's taken on by you, the provider, and sometimes it's taken on by the owner of
Yeah.
the business. I like to think of it as like, I know I've done projects that have generated X number of dollars.
Yeah.
Therefore, I think my type of website is worth this number. And the risk is assumed by me in pricing it at that flat rate rather than getting some kind of variable on the back end, and also assumed by the client in that they are the same type of business that can benefit from a website of that level. And that's where you really want to like work with the client to understand, where does this fit in your overall plan? Are there patterns between your past clients and this client? What kind of numbers can we actually expect? Or are we, not looking at that and assuming the risk? It's all like, how deep do you want to go?
Yeah, it's a scary model that I'm like just very interested and intrigued by.
But also, like, what's the alternative? You just charge hourly, and people say, you know, this type of work is worth this.
Well, I don't charge hourly, but I do charge like fixed rate, and
Yeah.
I've been doing day rates, but I haven't been doing them in like a retainer model. And now I realize, the thing that's tough is it's like I have a lot of clients that like totally it wouldn't even be like trying to sell hard to them. It's just I know that they need more of me or they need more assets, you know what I mean? Or
Right.
or whatever. And they would benefit greatly, like the value that they would get if I did actually pitch them and say, hey, even if we did a day rate, you know what I mean? Say we said $1,000 a day, and we do like one day a month, and I know my list or whatever. Say
Mm-hmm.
I'm working independently on it, or whatever it is, whoever's on it, and that costs them 12,000 a year. Even if it costs them 24,000 a year, they're not hiring a single like a junior graphic designer.
Right. Right.
Would be double that, and they're getting someone far better than like far not better, but like
Yeah.
a higher caliber of expertise, and also a network of people that they can plug and play if they don't need specific strategy or if they need whatever. So
Right.
like I think that it's a no-brainer, but I have not ever kind of considered I've always been concerned about the retainer model. I hate to say it because of exactly what happened with you with this marketing
Yeah.
person, and then how much I wonder if there was a moment of it being like, well, we'll see how much we can do in a month, and it's like, whoa, like what are we committing to? Are we allowing how much like you I think at some point you have to put a parameter around like how much time that is. And
Yeah.
if it was framed where it was like, say you had a day rate and say they had like 3 days of your time and that was 3,000, maybe that person was never in that equation to begin with. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah. I think understanding like what they value out of that relationship would have been mind opening, you know? Like what do they actually think they're getting, and is it they felt it was worth the investment at the time, but also maybe we weren't on the same page about deliverables. And that, I mean, that's the challenge of any time-based work is I'm going to do something for one price that delivers me some profit while the business makes a trillion times that. And so am I giving away profit for free? Or to the client's eyes, am I paying $1,000 for, 10 minutes of work? It's all, that's where it gets really tricky. But it's also really tricky to quantify the value of things that don't have analytics set up too, you know? That's where it's all kind of murky.
Well, I would say the recap would be there's two invaluable questions to client relationships. The first one at the very beginning, before you even offer or service anything, is what are you looking to get out of this?
Yeah.
And the second one being during or at, during the deliverable presentation phases, how are you feeling? What is your kind of a pulse check? Like,
Yeah.
am I providing what we had initially talked about?
Right.
If I'm not, let's talk about it. I think that's like pretty boiled down to
Yeah.
what helps.
And here's where I would advocate for the time-based model. Christo had somebody on his podcast talking about subscriptions and how they foresee that's going to be the new pricing model for the future. Everybody's going to just charge for access rather than for deliverables. I see in that barbell of pricing kind of the same mentality of if the risk and, you know, if you can make a low tier subscription for you that fits your time, but also delivers an upside of value relative to the price, I think that makes perfect sense. Like if you can give somebody an hour of your time for $1,000 a month, it's a relatively low investment, and depending on the advice that you give them, you could really make huge returns on that $1,000 without it being super risky or super, deliverable heavy or like difficult. That's my thinking. And there are people that are like, if you can pay $20 a month, you can do a group experience and you'll easily make $20 worth of value out of that. So it's easy to justify the cost, but it's also scalable for you as a business where, you can deliver on that far easier in that scale, I guess.
Yeah, I'm going to look that up. I'm going to dive into where that was in regards to kind of subscription models and Christo. I think that'll be my next kind of
Yeah.
dive from all the inputs that you've provided, insights. Yeah, I think it's a very fascinating and interesting thing. I think that I think we're both at the same place, and maybe this is with everyone.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
everyone's feeling this in this kind of independent sector where it's like, what are the bite-size subscription style things that provide huge impact for people that I
Yeah.
can harness and put a package around.
Yeah. And I think at the center of it is everybody has limited time.
Yeah.
Everybody can only make use of that 40 hours a week how they can.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to figure out a way that can either make more money for the time that you have available or justifying that time against the price you're charging is challenging because of market forces. where people say this should cost this should cost that, without necessarily understanding how things actually create value. I think maybe that's the core of like what I am fascinated by and struggle with, really understanding what the value, the monetary value of creativity, creative work is.
Yeah.
Because it's so elusive, and it can be so different from person to person. I think we obviously have like a sense of the value of it, but understanding monetarily how it translates into impact is a huge thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have stunned Kristin.
No,
I've
I'm
stunned
looking.
myself. I'm like, I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about anymore.
No, 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 no. I had a situation. I'll quickly tell it because I know we're kind of at the end of our kind of chat here, but I had a question come to me at one point where someone had asked me how I got to the number that I got to for the series of work I was doing.
Yeah.
And the feeling, sure, this isn't the actual reality, but it had me, the result of that conversation had me look up how to kind of break down the difference between creative pricing and predatory pricing. Not that I ever, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that some people somehow overlap predatory practices with the creative industry without even knowing that it's like,
Yeah.
and so yeah.
Because people feel they can be taken advantage of,
Yeah.
they don't want to be, obviously, but there are people that charge premium pricing for inferior products.
Yeah, and I had to Google it because honestly, I don't use predatory pricing as a term even. So it's interesting because it says predatory pricing is a business strategy where a company sells products or services at a loss to drive competitors out of business. So it's the antithesis of what I'm doing. I
Yeah.
can tell you
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
You
Predatory
know?
pricing is Walmart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the goal is to create a monopoly so that, dare I say Amazon? I
Yeah,
don't
no,
know.
they're predators. They're
Uh,
they're priced predatorily.
100%
Yeah.
predatorial. Love that word that we're just throwing around. So that the company can raise prices and earn higher profits. Okay, so maybe I've been using predatory as the wrong framework because I'm not dropping my pricing isn't low,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but it's just kind of like, but I've had people in the past before be like, well, I've gotten, that I've had people laugh in my face and be like, I've gotten a quote for a fraction of your estimate. And I'm like, cool.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the
I
thing.
have six figures of debt or had six figures of debt in private schooling. I bet they didn't. So this is where I land
Yeah.
because I have to afford,
Yeah.
It's like,
My
I went to a top school. I don't know. That's what you're going to be,
a friend of
you
mine is a
know?
photographer
Yeah.
who charges between 8 and 15,000 for a wedding. For
Good for them.
Yeah, probably it's probably more broad than that. But she got an inquiry from someone that was asking about pricing, and their response was, "I'd never pay more than $2,000 for a photographer. You're crazy to charge that much." And the response is just like,
Okay.
"Well, I do. I'm in business. People have happily paid that price." So there's some disconnect between what the perceived value and what the actual value is, and it's dependent on the person. They don't need a $10,000 wedding because they don't value the wedding that much, and that's fine. It's just not a fit.
Demographics, the people you're serving, what, and also like, okay, let's quickly break down. I am not a photographer. The level of stress and magnitude you
Right.
have as a wedding photographer, and pending where you are, say in the US, those demands are going to be a lot different in
Yeah.
Montauk than they are in Kansas. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there is a level of your body is going through so much stress, and then the security of making sure that you nail the shots of fleeting moments. And then
Yeah.
also, you probably need two shooters. You also need to think of the various lighting. You're going indoors, you're going outdoors. I mean, I don't know photography, but I know enough logistically to know that not everyone wants to do weddings for a good reason.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean,
Eh, The
she should charge what she feels. If she has no problem living her life and operating, she doesn't need to drop her costs for anyone.
well, yeah, there I mean that's it too. And I think people don't understand the business model of like wedding photography is
It's so stressful.
crazy. Well,
It's so
not even
stressful
that
for
it's
that
crazy,
human
but
to do
like
that.
I can't think of any other business where there's only a once in a lifetime chance to get this kind of shot. You plan it for a year. You you need to be both live taking the shot and have good editing skills after. And as a business, there's no it's seasonal, there's no guarantees, you're limited on the number of weekends where you can actually do the thing. It's a crazy, I don't know if it's like from an economic point of view or from a business point of view. It's just a really fascinating like way to function. I don't know. I've been, the more that I've learned about it, the more I'm like, this is so weird, and you have to make so many challenges that like a bakery doesn't face, or that an accountant doesn't have to face. I don't know. It's just a weird. It's a really interesting thing. Clearly, I can go on, but
Yeah, no, I mean, it's, yeah. So I guess predatory is I guess going back full circle, predatory isn't the term that I was really thinking of,
predatory
but
pricing at least isn't. But I get what
yeah,
you mean, where it's like
but
people feel they're getting taken advantage
taken
of.
advantage of, and it's tough too, because in my situation there was once where I was tongue tied, and they were just like, so is this really is this really what you think is best? And I'm like,
What a what a interesting question.
you just trailed that and made it into a good like what a, it's like, well, this is my proposal, what do you mean? You know what I mean? Like, it's
Yeah.
like, is this what I thought of? Like, and it's tough because when you're in those positions, and they don't happen often, but like, I think it's also just like people trying. I know a lot of I heard, the mentor, the guest mentor that we had at the last like roundtable dinner, he was like, I don't know if it was negotiate, I think negotiation, someone said, and he was like, oh, my partner hates that term. You know what I mean? It's like, but it's like, people trying to negotiate with you, and you just kind of being like, this is the cost. This is
Yeah.
what.
Yeah.
So,
I think the unspoken risk is something that's really worth talking about when you are pricing your services or talking to somebody about your quote, or maybe it's just something that's assumed in the price itself. But I think that's what drives a lot of prices.
is the risk. Yeah.
Yeah.
Shall we wrap it up?
Yeah, I think that would be, I think we've done enough today.
I think we've done enough.
We've
So we've,
rambled enough to
yeah.
get everything there.
Yeah. Do we want to do any takeaways? I mean, it's just a catch up, but
Yeah. I guess let us know what people in the comments, let us know what resonates the most for you and what you want to hear about from our perspective in the next catch up. Until next time.
until next time.
Bye. Thanks for listening to Working with Designers. Kristin and I would love to hear from you. Please give us a like and send us your thoughts on whatever platform you found us on. Let us know what questions you want us to talk about in the next episode by filling out our contact form at workingwithdesigners.com. Thanks, and we'll talk to you soon.